Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Alcindor against Bellamy.
Has Jordan, Allen shakes free, gets two! Gilmore on stuff! Oh, brother! Lead Toledo artists, you get 21.
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Ferry.
Jordan, open, Chicago with the lead!
Hello, and welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast at hardwoodparoxysm.com. I am Jason Mann, and with me, as usual, is Rich Craich. Rich, great to be back with you.
Absolutely.
And also, our very special guest today is Cleveland's own Mike Scherf, formerly of, or I guess part of the on hiatus dormant IGoHardNow podcast and website. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me on, guys. And yeah, haven't been good about updating the blog, but I wanted to throw in there the topics appropriate today because that is actually named. The blog was actually named after something that former Cavs great Christian Iyengar once said.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, we may reference Christian Iyengar again. You never know, but good to get him in there at the beginning. That's definitely the highlight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that checks the box.
I don't know
so go ahead.
No,
sorry.
I don't know the last time anybody talked about Christian Iyengar, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it was actually, we made a bingo card for this particular episode, and he was the one that I was like, no one's ever going to mention, and now that's gone. So I mean, the chances of winning bingo have increased rapidly with that Christian Iyengar reference.
Yeah, once you get Iyengar, there's no going back.
Exactly.
So we are going to talk about the first go around for LeBron James in Cleveland from 2004 to 2010. Basically, how the team was built around him, major trades and such during that period, how players and coaches during that time fit around him. Also talking about the ownership change in 2005, bringing in Dan Gilbert, of course, and, kind of some of the number of big trades that occurred during that time and just kind of all the things that went into building the team. I think there's sort of a general sense that the Cavs did not do particularly well in building a team around LeBron. And I think there are definitely ups and downs as far as that goes. Maybe we can kind of start off with that. And Mike, I'll let you go first. This is kind of a broad question, but overall, if you were going to kind of talk about how well the Cavs did in building good teams around LeBron, what would you say?
Well, it wasn't perfect. I mean, when you get a generation talent, I mean, I think you really do want to try and win a title. But that's really hard. It's hard when you're basically starting from nothing. I mean, the Cavs had to take this team apart and really be awful to even have a chance at LeBron, and lucked out and got the number one pick and got him. So they were starting from nothing. I mean, LeBron was on a team that first year with some awful players and awful people. And so to go from basically scraping the bottom of the barrel to get LeBron to being one of the best teams in the league, I would say, though, that it's a success. I mean, you want to win a title, but that's really hard to do. And you're seeing it right now in the NBA with teams like New Orleans with like Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis will be a generational talent, but it's really hard to build a team, especially when you've gone from having nothing. So overall, I think that the Cavs get a really bad rap. I think that they get... There's a really hard time because some of the signings didn't work, some of the trades didn't work. There wasn't a cohesiveness to the team building. But I mean, towards the end of LeBron's run, I mean, this team was one of the best, if not the best team in the league every single year. So it's hard to argue with that. They just couldn't close the deal.
Rich, anything overall on your feelings of how the Cavs did in delving into our deep research as we did?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I do think they got a bad rap in some respects because, like Mike mentioned, there were periods where they were, without a doubt, one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NBA. The NBA's best record a few of the years. And you look at a few key, like, playoff series and how much those swung and how that sort of, in a lot of ways, especially, like, in particular, like, the Orlando series is one that I always remember of, like, that just sort of nothing really worked out. After that, it was kind of like a little bit of a freak out. Like nobody was quite sure what to do. That was a really good team. I mean, they were 66-16 or whatever, happened to lose to this Magic team that was just sort of like, and I think in retrospect, a lot of us look back at that Magic team and go, oh my God, like what a weird revelation that Magic team was. I mean, to get to the NBA finals with that lineup and those sort of guys, even though of course they had Dwight Howard in his prime, but you had like Hito Turkoglu putting in like big minutes and like Rashard Lewis being one of the keys, and it's just such an odd team, and losing to that team really then that's what, a year out or 2 years out from LeBron leaving. That's sort of when I think a lot of it was like, okay, shit, like that was it, like that was our best chance maybe. Then you get that next year and then you get kind of reactionary where you get Shaq and all those sort of guys. So I really look at that 08-09 team as like, that team was a great team, should have by all intents and purposes made the NBA finals. They lost to Orlando by some means or whatever. I mean, things happen and whatever, we can't really change that history, but I think had they made that NBA finals that year, maybe we would look at this a little bit different. Or if, the previous year, I think they fell to Boston in 7 games the previous year, if that had sort of changed around a little bit, that maybe there'd be a completely different perception. But as we know it, they only made the NBA Finals that one time, when that was just a dog team that LeBron literally put on his back. And then, like, ever since they sort of did the tinkering, they couldn't make it to the finals, and then LeBron was gone. And it was just like, oh, crap. Like, but you really look at the guys, and you look at that roster, and you look at that starting lineup. Like, it's a pretty good lineup and a pretty good roster, all things considering. Yeah, there's some little bumps in the road here and there, but we sort of clouded again by just sort of being the championship or bust sort of things, which for better or for worse, we do that with star players. But I think it really affects LeBron, or at least this Cavs team's legacy in those last 2 years, just because they were a great team and they just couldn't, there was just one little playoff series where they just couldn't get it done, and that just sort of ruined everything.
Yeah, and if I can jump in real quick, another thing on that, I think it is interesting because when you bring up that Magic team that beat them when they were 66-16, let's not forget, the Magic were really, I mean, the Cavs were a pretty traditionally built team throughout LeBron's run. I mean, they were built like, a 90s team. They ran a lot of pick and roll, didn't do anything great. They played good defense. The Magic were really a revolutionary team, playing 1 in, 4 out. Plus, 2 guys on that team got popped for PEDs. So
we're gonna bust that out. We're gonna bust that out right now.
Well, no, I mean, to your actual rational point, the first one you made, no, I'm just joking. But as far as that one, I remember one of my vivid memories of that series is watching Anderson Varejao just like spinning in circles as he's like, where's my guy? Oh shit, he's at the 3-point line. And then like running out with his arms as Rashard Lewis is hitting another 3 in his face. And it's just like you said, it was like they had no idea what, and for in large part, the NBA had no idea what to do with a team that was constructed like that had 4 guys that can shoot threes and 1 guy that got every single rebound. And it was just, and that Cavs team, which was built like a traditional team, and had they, in my mind, had fought pretty much any other team but that Magic team, or if the Magic maybe had one, if Rashard Lewis or whoever was playing the 4, at that point, Rashard and Turkoglu, traded off, if they had maybe just a bigger guy that was sort of maybe mid-range, maybe he did some stuff, they would have probably had a better chance. But I just remember that team just could not stop, and LeBron had a great series, if I remember correctly. He just absolutely killed it, but they just could not stop the threes, and guys like Rashard Lewis are just banging threes on like Anderson Varejao and Ben Wallace and those sort of guys, and they just had no answer for those guys shooting, the power forward shooting threes was like, what do we do? How do we do this? And they didn't have a roster that was built for it. So we sort of, I think, a microcosm of that entire Cavs tenure or whatever can really go down to like a few different playoff series, this one in particular, where it was just like, well, that was just a bad matchup that, they did everything. They built a great team, but it was just like, that's just a bad matchup. It's hard to really, really chastise them too much for that.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit before we delve into some of those deep playoff runs. But let's start from the beginning. The year before the Cavs get LeBron, 2002-03, they bottom out at 17-65. They had been a pretty bad team for 3 or 4 seasons after some strong 1990s runs, really into 1998, I think was the last season that they were pretty strong under Mike Fratello. But they fell into hard times in the 2000s. They were coached by John Lucas. That 03 team was led by Ricky Davis, Zydrunas Ilgauskas, the legendary Jermaine Jones, Carlos Boozer, Darius Miles, and Milt Palacio. The GM was Jim Paxson, who had been hired in 1998. He is the brother of John Paxson, the current GM of the Bulls, and
Bulls, yeah.
well known for being part of the Bulls. Jim actually was a better player. He was a 2-time All-Star and 1 year was a second-team All-NBA player in Portland. So they get confused, but I think John's better known, but I think Jim was actually the better player. So fun fact there. Anyway, in the 2003 offseason, they are able to get the number 1 pick, of course, and draft LeBron James, which was just, immensely huge. I mean, LeBron, pretty much everyone listening to this, I'm sure knows this, but LeBron was just incredibly hyped throughout high school, was, built up as the next great big player, the next Jordan or Magic or what have you. And, and of course, rare for anybody to have those expectations lived for that hype. Paul Silas was hired as the coach. He was a longtime player and coach. He'd had success pretty recently before that in Charlotte with the Hornets before they had some moved to New Orleans and had some just, bottomed out a little bit. But he had a pretty good track record as a coach, steady former player, someone that LeBron respected. And it seems like that relationship was actually pretty sound for the most part. So. And actually, 2003, 2004, they were 35-47 and had a -3 SRS, which is not very good. It was 23rd out of 29 teams in the league. This was the last year before the Bobcats. But they finished 9th in the East. They were only 1 game behind the Celtics. LeBron was one of 3 players in history to have 25-5 as a rookie. The first year LeBron Cavs, they weren't too bad of a team. They actually, even though, that supporting cast, other than Carlos Boozer and Zydrunas Ilgauskas, was not necessarily a strong franchise.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. I mean, I think for what that team was, if you look at that roster, I mean, being the ninth seed in the East, almost making the playoffs. I mean, at the time the East was pretty bad. But almost making the playoffs in his first year, that's a huge improvement over where they were the year before, and that's really just adding that one guy. But fascinating team. They traded. I'm sure we'll get to it, but they traded Ricky Davis and Darius Miles off that team, pretty much as addition by subtraction moves, because I believe. There was a quote somewhere, Brian Windhorst always talks about it, that Ricky Davis gave a quote that they were drafting LeBron to play alongside of him, like as Ricky Davis's wingman.
So. Yeah, I think the quote is, "I thought he was going to be here to help me score."
Yep. So he had to go. That was not going to work out. And Darius Miles was another one that Darius didn't cause a lot of problems here. He just was bad. He wasn't good. Yeah. Freak athlete, didn't know how to play basketball. But they were just immature and they didn't know, how to play the game the right way. And I think especially with Paul Silas, I don't think he really put up with any crap like that. He was not that kind of guy. So those guys had to go. And ultimately, I think it was best, because it's weird to think of an alternative universe where LeBron played multiple seasons with Ricky Davis and Darius Miles.
No, that probably would not have worked out very well. Yeah, the key players for the team were also Kevin Ollie, Eric Williams, Ira Newble, Jeff McGinnis, Tony Battie, and then Davis and Miles. But as you mentioned, they were traded early on in the season. Davis was traded in December, basically a month and a half into the season, acquired for Tony Battie, who actually was a pretty good, steady veteran presence rebounder there. And then Darius was traded for Jeff McGinnis. You found some interesting details, Rich, from the Davis and Miles trades that I thought were good.
Yeah. So the Ricky Davis trade, going through and it's always great though when you can sort of we're talking about sort of recent history. So there's a lot of stuff on here if you look at ESPN and archives of the trade. So it's great to kind of look at the quotes of the GMs and the players involved and sort of see some stuff. The Ricky Davis trade, of course, one of the interesting quotes I found was Celtics, Danny Ainge, Celtics director of basketball operations, Danny Ainge, had been promising for months that he was going to fill the scoring void left when he traded Antoine Walker to Dallas. Ainge has apparently made that move with Ricky Davis, and we all remember the great Ricky Davis Celtics years. So, of course, just as Mike sort of mentioned, that Davis and Silas just did not get along or see eye to eye. That was one of the other interesting parts of that. The Darius Miles part, that was kind of interesting. After playing just 8 minutes Saturday in Utah in the final game of Cleveland's road trip, and with trade rumors about him circulating, Miles missed practice on Monday, saying he had just forgotten to set his alarm clock. The club was so concerned about Miles' unexplained absence that they sent the police to his house to make sure he was safe. So,
nice.
There's Miles, everybody.
Yeah. Nice that they were thinking about him. Yeah, and one of the bad things, they traded Darius Miles. They acquired Darius Miles for Andre Miller, and I feel like Andre Miller would have been a guy who would have been like a great guy to have running with LeBron. Now, if they had kept Andre Miller, they may not have gotten LeBron, so they might not have been bad enough that season to get him. But I always kind of thought that was like one of the, before they even knew they were going to get LeBron. But that was one of the early missed opportunities. I think of like, guys, LeBron's could have realistically played with that didn't make it onto the Cavs at that point.
Yeah, I think that's interesting about Andre Miller. I think he had to go in order to bottom out to get LeBron. But
yeah,
the thought of him playing with LeBron, I don't know if it would have worked. I love Andre Miller. I'm a huge admirer of his game, and I loved him here in Cleveland. But Andre Miller didn't push the pace. He was a point guard's point guard. He handled the ball. He wasn't a scorer, really. That was LeBron. I mean, he was the point forward. But what I think is really interesting is they actually flipped Darius Miles to get Jeff McGinnis. And I actually, have a soft spot in my heart for Jeff McGinnis. He ended up being one of the better players in some of those very early LeBron teams. I mean, he was a decent scorer. He was a nice point guard alongside of LeBron James. He wasn't as defensive minded, but he could score the ball as a second option because there wasn't a lot of other scoring options other than LeBron and Z really on these teams. So, I thought Jeff McGinnis was a helpful little piece, and that they basically flipped Darius Miles, who at that point was pretty worthless. I mean, he'd been in the league a significant amount of time. You kind of knew what you were getting with him. He hadn't played any really successful basketball. And when he was on the Cavs, a really interesting thing is I remember they would always move his position around. There was a season where I want to say Lucas had him like as a point guard. Like they were trying him as like a big point guard, almost like Lamar Odom. And that obviously didn't work because he couldn't handle the ball and didn't know how to play basketball. But, he was a 3. They played him a little bit at the 1. They tried to play him as like a small 4. He just didn't work anywhere. And that they flipped him for an actual kind of useful piece is actually pretty impressive.
Go Jim Paxson.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of things to praise for Jim Paxson as a GM, unfortunately.
No, cupboard was bare the first few years.
That's true. So there's a recent article on from the Boston Globe from June of 2015 talking to Paul Silas and talking about him coaching LeBron. And, he said that, LeBron was very good at first, but he didn't really understand the game that much. And a lot of players didn't like him because of the hype. Then he later said also that, he also had to kind of help LeBron, who would kind of get down because things weren't going well and because, the pressure carrying the franchise. But he said that, he really started to change and started to play hard and play well. And he said also before his second season that LeBron learned the entire offensive and defensive schemes for the whole team. And, he said, the quote is, "I couldn't believe it. He wasn't only 19 years old at the time, but he understood everything about this game. And eventually I knew he was going to be a great player," which, not that you couldn't tell he was going to be a great player, but just the I love the ability for LeBron to learn. I mean, we know that just how smart and what a player he is and how he just kind of understands everything that's going on the floor. But to have that at that age, in addition to all his athletic talents, added to the specialness.
Yeah, I think he has a point there. I think it was kind of interesting to think about, and I think a lot of high draft pick players come into a situation where LeBron didn't know anything about losing. Every team that LeBron James ever played on was not only good but dominant, and to come in and not be dominant had to have been a shell shock. And it's pretty impressive he picked up pretty quick not to sulk and get caught up in the losing. He handled it well, and that was always sort of the hallmark of LeBron in Cleveland. You never really heard about him. Not to get too far ahead, but all the stuff that came out after he left, where he was trying to run the franchise and was like a pain in the ass behind the scenes. You never heard any of that when he was there. I mean, he just kind of minded his own business. He was a good pro. He got nothing but praised for his demeanor and stuff. So, he was an incredibly mature rookie.
Yeah, I mean, especially for his age, and being and just the expectations that he had. I mean, they were pretty incredible. So they, as we mentioned, they finished just one game out of the playoffs. So they kind of they're starting to have like a decent little. You can kind of see that there's kind of a core developing there. Behind LeBron, behind Boozer, behind Z, and then the 2004 offseason happens, and Carlos Boozer leaves, bamboozled, as you might say. He apparently he and the Cavs made a under the table agreement where the Cavs would release Boozer. And then he was a second round draft pick, and he had, basically a rookie minimum type contract, and that they would release him from that and then sign him to their mid-level exception, 6 years, $40 million. And then Boozer went ahead and instead of that, he signed a 6-year, $68 million deal with Utah. Now, granted, the Cavs were not really legally allowed to, they were breaking the rules as much as he was, or I guess he wasn't really breaking the rules, but broke his word to the Cavs, was vilified for it, and the Cavs ended up losing a player that turned out could have been very important for them.
Yeah. Look, as a Cleveland fan, nobody here likes Boozer. That was pretty low, but at the same time, the Cavs are up to some shady stuff. And to be honest, I can't really think of any other examples when a team really tried to pull that. I mean, that was a pretty brazen move to basically renounce the rights and let a guy become an unrestricted free agent to sign basically a longer deal that was beneficial to the player, but pretty beneficial to the team as well. It probably happened. It might have happened, but I can't really think of it off the top of my head. But so I think it was pretty, ballsy for the Cavs to try and not to look shady. But at the same time, I mean, why would the Cavs do it if they didn't have Boozer's word? They just wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. So there was a great chance he basically went back on his word and I think rightly vilified. I mean, why wouldn't fans be mad at him for that? I mean, was he taking care of his family? Was he taking care of himself by getting the most money he can? Absolutely. Were the Cavs dumb for letting him do it? Absolutely. But as a fan, nah, man, forget him.
Do you? I wonder, Mike. Maybe because you obviously have the Cleveland.
Sure.
Was there, do you think, a point where maybe Boozer had said, I'm in, and then Utah calls and said, hey, how about $28 million more dollars than you had? And he went, oh shit. Like, do you think it was like, I always thought that he wasn't necessarily like devious with it, at least from the quotes I've seen and everything I've read, that it wasn't necessarily like, haha, let me out of my contract. Now I'm going to the highest bidder. More that he was ready to go. And then Utah said, hey, hi, how about this? And he went, oh, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go do that instead. Like, that's how I've always seen it. So yeah, you can I think it's still I always have this idea that you can still vilify him to an extent, but I think that he probably was up on his word until the Utah came calling and said, hey, we got this for you, and he went, oh, okay, sorry, bye.
Sure, but that,
it doesn't make it right.
You're parsing. I mean, he still lied. He still went back on his word, and I mean, it's really hard to look $28 million in the face and 2 more years of No, same 6-year deal.
Yeah, so, same year.
Yeah, so $26 million more, $28 million more, $28 million more. Yeah,
Not bad.
It's hard to look that right in the face and say, nah, my word's more valuable than that. But so, I mean, at the end of the day, I think I totally agree with you. I don't think it was devious, unless maybe his agent was devious, like maybe saying, yeah, we'll do this, let us out of the contract and we'll sign the deal. I don't know, but I do tend to believe it went the way you said it went, but I don't know. As a fan, still doesn't make it right, and still kind of upsets me because I really did think he was a nice piece. I mean, him and LeBron. I remember coming out of that first year, it was like, wow, this Boozer guy could really be something. The second round pick could really be something and play alongside LeBron. Have a nice tandem.
Yeah. Although, would you really have wanted to root for Carlos Boozer for 6 years? I mean, he's kind of like.
Trust me, I had him in my team.
Yeah,
yeah.
6 years when he's young, playing alongside of LeBron. I mean, he wasn't terrible in Utah.
He was really good. Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, I was looking at like the Cavs roster, like. They had a lot of like third and fourth best players on a team with LeBron, but they really didn't have that second best player with LeBron, and Boozer would have fit into that very well, I think. And I think they would have complemented each other pretty well. And I think that would have really, keeping him would have been really important and could have definitely changed the Franchise. I mean, he was a very good player until he got older, anyway.
And really, I mean, we'll get to it in a second, but essentially they replaced him with Drew Gooden down the road. I mean, we'll talk about it. I really liked Drew Gooden at that time. I thought he was a really nice player for this team. But I mean, would you rather have Drew Gooden at that time, or would you rather have Carlos Boozer? I mean,
Right. Yeah. So they also during that offseason, they traded a 2007 draft pick that later turned into Jared Dudley, obtaining Sasha Pavlovich. They drafted Luke Jackson with the 10th overall pick. They acquired Eric Snow in a trade, and the aforementioned trade Tony Battie to the Magic, acquiring Drew Gooden and a little-known Brazilian named Anderson Varejão.
Yeah, I mean, that netted our power forward combo for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so that was a nice pivot off of there, and obviously, Varejão turned into a very important Cavalier. So that so they did bounce back pretty well from that, but obviously, losing Boozer was a key loss. The 2005 season, the Cavs finished 42-40. It's a winning record, a .27 SRS, which is 15th out of 30 teams in the league. Again, they finished 9th in the East. They actually tied. They had the same record as the 8th place Nets, but they lost a tiebreaker of some sort. LeBron's stats improved across the board. He went from 20 points to 27.2 points per game, 7.4 rebounds a game, 7.2 assists per game, and his value over placement player rating moved up. I think it more than doubled. So
it was 3-1 and then went to 8-8.
Yeah.
So
big improvement. Yeah. I mean, this was the first year he was very good, but it was clearly a rookie season as far as his shooting and some of the advanced stats. But already in 05 he's having all-star level advanced stats. All-star level play. And the key players on the team, McGinnis, Ilgauskas, Gooden, Snow, Ira Newble, and Tractor Trailer. And this the really big things that happened this year are the ownership changed. The team is sold from Gordon Gunn to Dan Gilbert, which that commences on March 3rd, 2005. And then 8 days after Dan Gilbert becomes the official owner of the team, Paul Silas is fired. They are at 34-30, but they've been struggling. They had lost 9 out of 12 games. And Paxson really ripped into Silas. So there's a ESPN story where he basically, the quote is, "We're 64 games into the season. We still don't have a consistent rotation, substitution pattern, those types of things. We didn't see that changing." So that's a fairly big indictment of Silas. And they ended up finishing the season with Brendan Malone, who is Mike Malone's dad, and they finished just outside of the playoffs. So they're 8-10. So, but the thing that stands out about the end of that 2005 season and into the off season is there's a really compressed time frame between the ownership change, the firings of Paul Silas and Paxson, hiring the new coach Mike Brown and GM Danny Ferry, and then the pivotal summer of free agency. That all happens 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I think it's pretty indicative of Dan Gilbert that he would want to come in and start making some moves and shuffle the deck. And I think both Silas and Paxson had it coming to them. I think it's harder on Silas. I think Silas was a decent coach. He got LeBron James and he got a few good players, but he was kind of dealt a hand of some knuckleheads. I mean, the first year he had Ricky Davis, Darius Miles, and then even though I liked McGinnis and thought he was a useful player, he was kind of an idiot. There was also an incident. I think it was Silas's last year, where the media was waiting outside of the locker room to come in after the game for quotes. And Paul Silas chased Ira Newble out of the locker room, calling him a hip-hop motherfucker.
That's right. So, I forgot about that.
So there was, I think there was a cultural clash there between Silas, who was like really old school, hard-nosed, no nonsense, played the game, and was, he was a real tough guy back in his day. I mean, he didn't take any crap on this team that was extremely young, had a couple knuckleheads. I just think it got to a point where he had a hard time relating to the players. And on top of that, Gilbert came in, and Gilbert likes to make moves, as we find out. And then Paxson needed to go. I mean, I wouldn't trust him with building a team around LeBron. So ultimately, I think they both had it coming. I just think it was a little unfair to Silas. He was in a bad spot. But, when you can't relate to players, why are you around?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he would have been the guy that took them into the future, but I do think it does seem like, hey, they were 34-30. They had a pretty good year as far as how they were progressing. When they were at about the right spot. Now, whether again the relationships with the players are pretty important, and if that's not going well, then it certainly seems reasonable to make a change. But I guess just doing so quickly and doing so in kind of a manner that seemed sort of rash, especially going into what ended up being a really important offseason, just seemed it does seem a little bit Dan Gilbertish, the way that and I think as the years have happened, he's become a better owner in many ways. But that definitely is like, oh yeah, that's pretty that's a pretty bold thing to kind of do right away. One last move that Paxson made before he went out the door was the trade deadline of 2005, and he traded the Cavs first round pick for Jerry Welsh, and basically he traded one first round pick, and then there was another one that he had to be, the lottery protection had to be removed on the 2005 pick. So they basically lost 2 first round draft picks because of trading for Jerry Welsh, and that will become important during the offseason. But we'll move away from that for a moment. So and
real quick, if we can, Paxson, his draft history. I see on here he picked, in your notes for the podcast, he drafted Trajan Langdon, he drafted the Sonia Diop. He also drafted Luke Jackson, who got hurt. He had a bad back, but we don't really know how good he was. He never really showed much when he played. And then I can't remember if Paxton was responsible for Dewan Wagner.
He was. Yes, he was.
Okay.
He was, yeah.
So, yeah, that's a mess. Carlos Boozer is your only success, your only draft success. That's a problem. That's really a big problem.
It's not ideal.
No.
Yes. So he was out a day after the season ended. exactly a month after Paul Silas was fired, and not so much good there. And then June 1st, Mike Brown is hired as coach. He is comes from the Spurs assistant coach. He's actually hired before the general manager. And in the USA Today story on his hiring, there were rumors at the time that Larry Brown was going to come in and was going to be GM of the team. And basically that was like the big news of Mike Brown being hired was, sort of the sideline. It was all about Larry Brown going to be going there, I guess with the Detroit connection with Gilbert being there. Of course, Larry Brown ended up going to coach the Knicks, and that ended up being a fiasco. So probably a bullet dodged with that. And instead, Danny Ferry is hired. So, Mike, do you kind of remember what you were thinking as far as, Mike Brown, Danny Ferry? They both come from the Spurs tree. Danny Ferry has a history as a Cleveland player that was not particularly good. Not that it's particularly relevant, but he's certainly not like a guy who gives you great vibes. Do you kind of remember what you were feeling about that?
Not really. I think it was sort of a trust hire that these guys are coming from the Spurs. The Spurs run a smart organization. They have a successful team. So let's give it a try. Danny Ferry wasn't a good player for us, but he played a long time and actually, really got by. And he had some dust ups with Jordan and stuff. So he was a tough guy. He was kind of a scrub, but he was a scrub for a long time. So there's some value to that. But he went to Duke. I mean, he's a smart guy. So I as I recall, it was just sort of a trust hire. I mean, those guys aren't necessarily on anybody's radar when they're hired. It wasn't like hiring Larry Brown. And I think, like any fan base, you always kind of prefer the name brand candidate. But, I think that at the time it was like, oh, you're pulling out of the Spurs trees. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this leads to big free agency haul of the Cavs. They re-signed Ilgauskas and they signed Larry Hughes, Daniel Marshall, and Damon Jones. I remember they were connected to Ray Allen and Michael Redd, who were kind of the two big free agents of that offseason, and neither wanted to. They both re-signed with their teams for more money. Neither one wanted to come, but those were kind of the targets. Larry Hughes was kind of a little bit down the line, but Hughes was young. He had a reputation for being a good defender. He was 27, so he was a few years older than LeBron, who was 21, but he was still, young enough. Good ball handler and rebounder. So, but the issue, which became pretty apparent quickly, is that he was not a good shooter. And, with LeBron, you ideally want shooters. They got Daniel Marshall and Damon Jones, who were both pretty good shooters, but Marshall was 32 and Damon Jones had kind of had one really, really good year as a 3-point shooter, and otherwise had he played for like 30 teams. So he was not necessarily a guy you were going to want to give big money to. So I kind of feel like this offseason, they probably did the best that they could do, given the fact that no teams were willing to, either, the players that would have made the most sense didn't, want to go there. But it obviously, I think for the most part, this offseason set them back as opposed to push them forward, even though they did. They did have they did improve in the meantime, but as far as getting really close to winning a championship, these may not have been the best moves.
I don't know. I tend to disagree. I think Larry Hughes, I agree with you. I think he's the best they could have done. Everyone here wanted Michael Redd really bad, but we ended up dodging a bullet because Michael Redd blew out his knees, and that would have almost been worse than subpar Larry Hughes. I'd rather have a guy who plays and is average or a tick above average than somebody who's not playing. Because what would we have done then? I think Larry Hughes was a mistake just from not thinking of, number one, he can't shoot. Number two, he was a 2 that handled the ball and needed the ball in his hands. and it's kind of LeBron's thing that he handles the ball, and that's his value, that the ball's in LeBron's hands. So, you kind of needed a guy who could hit open shots, and that wasn't really Larry Hughes, and I can't really blame him for that. I just think they went out, I think they panicked a little bit and tried to get a running mate for LeBron, and just, when they struck out on Ray Allen and Michael Redd, who made a lot more sense as basketball fits, they just got the next name that was a two-guard to play alongside LeBron, because you already had your bigs. I mean, you had Boozer, not Boozer, sorry, you had Gooden, and you were developing Verjao, and you had Z, who was still a very good player. We haven't even talked about him yet, but, I mean, Z was a constant through this run as a very good player. So your front court was pretty set, and then you just kind of needed a guy in the backcourt. So that was a mistake. Damon Jones, I would say he wasn't a terribly great player, but he actually kind of meant a lot to this team in the locker room. Him and LeBron got really close, and, they're still close to this day. Like, Damon Jones is in LeBron's entourage. So, Damon Jones wasn't great and didn't really contribute on the court, but I really thought he meant something to this team. And contributed to the personality of this team that would develop, where it was a fun team and they liked to joke around and was very family, like a family atmosphere. And I think he also brought a certain level of professionalism, because he was in the league for a while at that point. So, I don't think Damon Jones was like the worst things. I don't think they threw a ton of money at him. And Daniel Marshall was ancient and was
right.
Kind of
I guess I wouldn't say that like Jones would have been he was maybe a little overpaid, but yeah, he did fit in fine, and he was as you mentioned, certainly the chemistry and those things made him important. But he could hit a 3 or 2 every so often. Yeah, I mean he was kind of being rewarded for a career year with a big contract, and he probably on the court didn't justify, but the other stuff it certainly was fine. But it was it was more of the Hughes and the Marshall ones that definitely were the ones that were kind of the setbacks.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But they did improve quite a bit the next season. They were 50-32. They had a 2.17 SRS, 8th in the league, 4th in the East. They actually the 3rd best record in the East, but the seeding was a little bit different then, and they were behind the 3rd best record because of divisional stuff. They won their first playoff series since '93, beating the Wizards. They're who they sort of had a rivalry with during the time, although they would always win that. So do you call it a, well, obviously, Mike, you're a Cleveland guy. Do you consider a rivalry? Did you consider a rivalry?
Nah, man, get out of here, Wizards. They still try and act like they're a rival. All those Wizards blogs get all excited when they play the Cavs, and it's so adorable that they get real excited over this, and they're still holding these feelings about it. But nah, come on, get out of here with that.
So they won that series. They lost to the Pistons in 7 in the second round. So they weren't defending champions, but they were defending from a finals appearance. So they were still just about as good as that title team was. So they took the Pistons 7. Would have to feel good about that, I would say. Key players other than LeBron were Eric Snow still chugging along. They had quite a few older guys on this team. Z was 30, although as you mentioned, he was very productive and would basically remain productive, for the entire time of LeBron's run, maybe save the last season or so. Gooden was younger. He was 24. He was good. Jones and Marshall and Hughes all contributed. And Flip Murray would be the other guy that who was kind of the volume bench scorer that another guy bounced around on a lot of teams, but was decent enough. But Anything else that Rich, we'll go to you first. Why don't you talk about LeBron's season kind of compared to the past seasons, because he definitely took another step up this year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and like we talked about before, he was 27 points per game the year prior. This one, he's 31.4 points per game, 7 rebounds per game, 6.6 assists per game. So his rebounds and assists go down slightly, but the points skyrocket. His value over replacement player at 9.5 this year. Like, he's really become like a full-fledged superstar at this point. And like, and it shows too. The third best record in the league, fourth in the East, third best record in the East. Take the Pistons to, as you said, 7 games in the second round. So you really you finally start getting the idea that, okay, this is a guy, and we all sort of knew it, but this was sort of, I think, the year where everybody sort of realized, okay, this is a guy that if he's on your team, you have a good chance of winning the championship. You just got to sort of put some guys around him, do some stuff, do some team building. But he's a bona fide, no doubt superstar at this point. And we kind of, I think, knew that was going to happen. But this was nice to see that it was just like, okay, this guy is just, he's for real. I mean, he's a bona fide superstar at this point.
So, Mike, what did you anything that stands out to you as far as the Cavs from this season?
No, I mean, they made the playoffs. That was exciting. LeBron was awesome. They were just good. I mean, LeBron scored 31 a game that year. I mean, that's pretty incredible for a third-year player. He was really good. The team was good. It was exciting to make the playoffs. And I think it sort of re-energized the city. I think it was really easy to panic those first 2 years, thinking like, oh my God, are we going to blow this? We get, this amazing generational talent, and are we going to screw this up by building a team? And then Dan Gilbert came along, and Dan Gilbert's super impulsive. We didn't really necessarily know that about him at the time, but he came in and fired the coach and GM, brought in a new coach and GM, spent a bunch of money in the offseason. The team makes the playoffs. I mean, we started to think like, hey, this guy's coming in and really helping us out. Like, he's opening up his wallet and spending money. And Dan Gilbert's always done that. I mean, you can say a lot about Dan Gilbert, and I do. I mean, he's a really weird guy and does a lot of really weird things and says very, very peculiar things. But the guy spends, and you can't really ask much more out of an owner than a guy who wants to spend. So, he came in and did it.
Yeah. I think a little bit when we get deeper into it, I want to talk a little bit maybe about, culture building and whether they've been able to kind of build a good culture. And whether during this period or during the more recent LeBron period, how that what your perception of that is. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So the 2006 offseason, they drafted Shannon Brown and Boobie Gibson. Boobie Gibson was a second-round player, definitely did more for the Cavs. Shannon Brown really didn't do much for the Cavs. They also signed Scott Pollard and David Wesley. So fringe signings for the most part. Pollard, I guess was okay. It was more like a weird-looking guy off the bench than anything. I think he did play pretty well during his Sacramento years before that, but I don't recall him standing out that much in Cleveland. Other than just trying to be a requisite weirdo. And then in the 07 season, they had the same record, 50-32, but they had a better SRS, 3.33, seventh in the league. They were the second seed in the East, and surprisingly enough, they reached the finals. They swept the Wizards in the first round, beat the Nets in the second round. Beat the Pistons in the conference finals. This is the famous conference finals where in Game 5, LeBron scored 29 out of the final 30 points in double overtime, and they upset the Pistons in the series. And then in the finals, they did not do as well, and they were swept by the Spurs. But, given who LeBron's teammates were...
That's a dog-ass team.
They had Hughes... Good. I mean, they did a pretty similar roster that they had last year, honestly. But most of the guys were, Verjao was playing more. Gooden was playing a little bit more. But, it was a similar roster. I guess Pavlovich was the guy who definitely played more. He actually had a pretty good year in 07 and would never replicate that again. But yeah, I mean, this was obviously one of the great moments in Cavalier history is making the finals, and then the way that the finals went was not so good.
No, that was a really memorable season, though, as a Cleveland fan. Beating Detroit was awesome. LeBron was awesome in that series. There was a game where Boobie Gibson really lit them up, where after that season, it was kind of like, hey, is Boobie Gibson going to turn into something? Even as, like, just a sharpshooting, kind of one or two, to play alongside of LeBron. We were kind of excited about that. But, yeah, I mean, it was mixed emotions because I remember that series when they beat Detroit. I mean, I don't remember feeling as high and as happy as I did as when they beat the Pistons in that series. It was incredible. Like, I'll never forget that series. And then, the finals just brought everyone back down to earth, but it's understandable because that was kind of peak Spurs, and like Tony Parker was awesome in that series. He just shredded us, just destroyed us. And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, you're running Boobie Gibson and Eric Snow and Damon Jones out there. Yeah, you're going to get destroyed by Tony Parker. But so, yeah, I'm always going to remember that season. It was an awesome run. They were overmatched in the finals. I don't think their team was like awful, but they had no business. They were a 50-win team. They had no business being in the finals.
Yeah, it was a weird year for the East. I mean, it was. I mean, for most of this period, the East was kind of down. That's actually going to change in the in the following season. But yeah, it was still even weird. Yeah, the fact that they were a 50-win team making the finals, that doesn't happen very often anymore. But they definitely have good vibes. From even the bitter taste of losing to the Spurs, they certainly do stand out. But in the offseason, those good vibes are shattered a little bit when there are two big holdouts. Sasha holds out until October 30th, and Verjao until December 5th when he gets an offer from the Bobcats, and then the Cavs Magic. Both are restricted free agencies. And there's actually an article from when Sasha signed of LeBron complaining publicly in a piece from Windhurst, and he says, "For me as a leader, you want guys around you that are going to help you win ball games. I'm going to do it as best for the team, but at the same time, you see teams regrouping and reshaping. With our team, we didn't do any reshaping, we didn't do any regrouping. You start to think a bit, how are we going to continue to get better?" So, and that lesson is heated later on in the season, but yeah, I mean, but Sasha really struggled that year. He shot just 36% from the field. Verjao was fine for didn't really, maybe lost a little bit, but nothing significant. But they were 9-12 by the time he returned to the lineup, so they definitely fell off. LeBron production-wise actually had a little bit of a down year in 07, at least compared to 06, but he definitely bounced back in 08. Rich, how did he do?
Yes, so LeBron, of course, 30 points per game, 7.9 rebounds per game, 7.2 assists per game, and then a 10.1 value over replacement player. So just a tremendous year all around for him. And finally, that first eclipse of the 10, 10 plus value over replacement player, which he would do a few other times in his career, but this was the first time when he got to that level. So yeah, like as we said, beyond like a bona fide superstar and just like a perennial MVP candidate at this point, and he had really just had become the man, of course, for the East and largely in the NBA as well. I mean, really had just arrived and gotten there. And the team though, not as much. They struggled a little bit. Not struggled, but weren't as good.
Yeah, I really think going back to the whole, the holdout things, everyone kind of understood Verjao because Verjao was becoming a really good, important player on this team because at the time, a lot of what the Cavs did well was predicated off playing defense. And man, these Cavs teams were incredible on the offensive boards. Like, were really, really good. They would hit the boards hard, especially on the offensive end. And Verjao was a big piece of that. Gooden was really good at it. Z was good at it. But Varejao was really coming into his own, and, fans kind of understood to some level. I don't think they were happy about it, but they understood. Pavlovich, come on. Like, the year before, he was okay. He was actually pretty good in that Nets series the year before. He did a good job on Vince Carter, but he was a dog. Like, he was a 2 that couldn't, like, he was athletic, but he couldn't dribble to get to the rim. He wasn't a great shooter. Like, he wasn't an awesome defender. He was competent, I guess. Like, he was one of those guys that, like, he had a good, like, body for a basketball player, but, like, you don't know what he does well. So I think a lot of fans were really frustrated when, it wasn't good that he was a rotation player for this team, but when somebody who shouldn't be holding out is, and they're kind of a semi-important piece to just being in the rotation, it gets incredibly frustrating. So, I think part of what LeBron was saying with that quote was, we have these guys holding out, and maybe one of them isn't even good enough to be on this team, and we should be looking to upgrade him. But instead, he's just not here, and we have a hole. So that was incredibly frustrating going into that year. And I do think, as I recall, Varejao's production did slip that year because he was out.
Yeah. I mean, he only played 48 games that year and started only 13. He performed okay. But yeah, he was definitely had slipped a bit. I mean, I would say the key players, were besides LeBron and Z, Boobie Gibson, I think, stepped up a bit that year.
Absolutely.
Devin Brown was the fourth leading minutes leader for the team, which is not a good sign. And then Gooden, Jones, Varejao, Hughes, and Pavlovich. The big change happened at the trade deadline, where the Cavs, they traded away Marshall, Gooden, and Hughes, and they acquired Ben Wallace, Wally Zerbiak, Joe Smith, and Delonte West. Ended up really being a franchise reshaping trade, allowing them to have a really great deal of success over the next 2 seasons, even though they obviously didn't win a championship. But really the big transition that led them to having those last 2 seasons of great teams. I had sort of remembered them having the impact being a little bit more immediate. They were 30-24 before the trade and only 15-13 after the trade. But if you look at net rating, it was negative 1.3 before the trade, the difference between offensive and defensive rating. And then after the trade, it was 1.5. So clearly, the record may not have been there, but they were definitely playing better basketball. And they had a okay playoff run. They ended up going to the second round, losing to the Celtics in 7, beating the Wizards again in the first round. Definitely have to mention that. They definitely took it to the Celtics in that second round, and LeBron had kind of a classic duel with Paul Pierce in that Game 7. At the same time, that Celtics team, even though it was historically great regular season team, and ended up winning the championship, they had also gone to 7 against the Hawks, who had won 37 games that year. So they had been struggling a little bit weirdly in the playoffs. I think it was kind of a combination of the Cavs playing better, but also the Celtics still kind of working through whatever they had to work through in order to get to the finals and finally play championship basketball.
Yeah, I think the trade was huge. I think that trade brought some legitimate pieces to the Cavs going forward. I think Zerbiak was a nice, he was never really great, but he was a nice fit with LeBron because he could shoot. He had a little bit of athleticism. He was a nice little player. Delonte West, I mean, when his head was right, he was incredibly useful as being able to play the 1 and the 2. He had some fire to him. He liked to defend. A huge fan favorite. Like, I adored Delonte West. The fans loved Delonte West. Like, he was a huge part of those teams. And, this was really when the Cavs started hitting their stride, and before the games, LeBron would do, like, the family picture thing where they would all, like, pose. these teams really started that. And Delonte was a huge part of that because for as many problems and demons as he had, he was a talented player, and he was actually like a really funny guy and a real personable guy when his personality was kind of right. So important piece. And Joe Smith actually was it's hard to think about it, but at the time I remember like people were excited about getting Joe Smith. He was like a veteran, kind of did the dirty work, had some experience. He was kind of a interesting player to get. So I think that trade was a much needed infusion of talent going forward.
Yeah, and even though Wallace was kind of viewed as a little bit washed up at the time, certainly overpaid, he did. I mean, I think he did help shore up their defense, and and was. I remember always like that he would really be great in, a lot of the plus minus stuff, the adjusted plus minus stuff really still liked him even after, kind of his reputation had slipped a bit.
Yeah, Wallace was fine. I don't think anybody was excited because he was coming from Chicago and he was pretty bad that year in Chicago, as I recall. They wanted to get
he was terrible.
They wanted to get out from under that deal.
And him and Skiles, I mean, shocker of all shocker, him and Skiles didn't really get along either.
Right.
So it was sort of, I do remember, I'm not looking at stats in front of me, but I do remember when he went to Cleveland, he seemed to be a little bit rejuvenated, not in the sense that he was, the Detroit Pistons Ben Wallace, or the Ben Wallace of old, but it seemed like he was sort of, maybe that last year in Chicago, he wasn't, full effort or full, he was sulking a little bit. That was just a mess, whatever was going on there. So it seemed like when he went to the Cavaliers, he was a little rejuvenated, and it helped that he wasn't being relied upon. The Bulls, when they acquired him, it was a big deal of, okay, here's Ben Wallace, our big free agent acquisition, and he was totally miscast in that role. That's not Ben Wallace. Like, we know from Detroit, he's best at being, the third or fourth guy, the guy that's just sort of in the shadows, but really good at what he does. And I think when he came to Cleveland again, and we saw with that, the 08-09 season, he was just great at being that role player, of doing that sort of role versus being, somebody that was relied upon to do things. Like, that's not him. Like, it never should be Ben Wallace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Ben Wallace, like, on the Cavs, I think you have a great point. Like, he was just asked to come in and play defense and rebound the ball. Like, don't do anything other than that. You don't need to be a star. Nobody's looking at you. We have a lot of other players that people are going to be talking about and paying attention to. Come in and do the stuff you did in Detroit. And he wasn't like awesome, but he was good. He was solid.
He fit his
role. He was a nice compliment to Z. I mean, Z was kind of like a pick and pop guy, had a lot of size, rebounded pretty well, but wasn't like the greatest defender. He got some blocks because he was big. But him and Ben Wallace were a nice compliment because they did two sort of different things, and you could give people different looks with Ben Wallace and Zydrunas.
Anything else about that the Celtics playoff series, or anything else about that season, or should we move on to the future?
I think the next season is the exciting. That's sort of the main course here.
I think that's a good point. So 2008 offseason, fairly well, one big trade. They draft J.J. Hickson, and their big trade is trading for Mo Williams, losing Joe Smith, a pretty strong guard. Was kind of thought of as like, he was fairly young, was considered like a guy who might develop into a borderline all-star player. In fact, he did make an all-star team. The deservedness of that was sort of in question, but whatever. He was a nice piece, and they were able to just another good solid guard to have for depth. They were able to put it all together in the 2009 season. They were 66-16 with an 8.68 SRS, which was first in the league. They finished first in the East, and they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, beating the Pistons, sweeping the Pistons and sweeping the Hawks, and then losing to the Magic in 6 games. As we talked about earlier before, that was considered a big upset at the time, but if you kind of look at how they were playing, if you look at sort of the East did have 3 really strong teams that year. The Cavs and the Magic were 2 of them. The Magic had a 6.48 SRS. The Celtics had a 7.45 for SRS, and they actually 62 wins. The Magic had 59 wins. So they pretty much 3 elite teams out there in the East, and the Celtics would have been even better if it hadn't been for Kevin Garnett's injury. They had one of the best 35 to 40 game starts in NBA history, even better than the 08 season. So my point is that the East was top heavy. So, in retrospect, the fact that the Magic were able to, compete close to the Cavs, those teams, I think, actually measured out fairly similarly, despite the Cavs having a better reputation. And as we talked about, just the way that they matched up, the way that the Magic were able to kind of stretch them, everything involved, make it, I think, less of an upset in retrospect.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting is this is the first year where I remember hearing, some questions about LeBron. I don't know. But the funniest part is that you look at his stats from this particular playoff series, and they're just like otherworldly. I mean, he had 38 points per game, 8.3 rebounds per game, 8 assists per game, and then 1.2 steals per game and 1.2 blocks per game. And he shot 48.7% in that series. So, I don't think it was LeBron's fault. So I will a hot take here.
Maybe there are. Yeah, maybe there are things where they could have played in a different way and LeBron could have facilitated that. But I think as far as production performance wise, I don't think LeBron was really doing anything wrong in that series, or pretty much throughout his entire Cleveland career.
Yeah, and that entire team, if you remember, I think Wally Szczerbiak had like a horrible series, if I remember correctly. Or no, I'm looking at it right now. He shot 16% from 3, so that doesn't really help.
No.
Mo Williams, he was 37.5, not great. Delonte West, 31.8. So a lot of their guys, A, they weren't really getting a lot of threes, and then B, they weren't really hitting them as well. So that definitely hurt them a lot, especially with Orlando being such a good three-point team and shooting, I think, above 40% at that in that series.
It was a really bad matchup. This was sort of the peak of LeBron versus Kobe as a discussion point. And is LeBron clutch? Does he choke? That was a big thing. But he was awesome in the series. I believe in one of the early games, game 2 or game 3, he hit a game winner.
Yeah, it was game 2.
Yeah, so, that was stupid in retrospect. But, I mean, at the time, it was stupid in retrospect. But at the time, it felt kind of real. I mean, it's a mirage where, he played well, but, as a Cleveland fan, you're telling yourself, this guy's awesome, but why can't we go anywhere? But, taking a step back and look, a lot of the guys that were on that team weren't equipped for the moment. And I hate to get too much into who's clutch or who's not, but Mo Williams was probably the best player and the second best player on that team. He was an all-star that year. Mo Williams has never played well in the playoffs. Mo Williams has never been known as a guy you want to go to when things are getting real. So there were a lot of flaws with that team. I remember Jameer Nelson destroyed the Cavs. Keto and Rashard Lewis were both awesome. I don't remember Dwight really killing us, but it was all predicated around Dwight. You're terrified of Dwight and you leave 3-point shooters open.
Rafer Alston, I remember, had a really good series. I'm looking at it now. Yeah, Rafer Alston had 12.5 points per game. You really can't, get ready for that to happen. But
it was one of those series where you, as a Cavs fan, I felt they were literally helpless. Every shot the Magic was shooting was going down. We couldn't stop them. They had every answer. Our team wasn't built to defend them. It was just bad. It was a really bad feeling. And it was incredibly frustrating to be a 66-win team and have that happen. It was crazy. But I guess when you're using PEDs and cheating, that's what happens.
One of my favorite parts of this Orlando team too is who they had on the bench that really didn't contribute much. You had Courtney Lee, Gortat, and JJ Redick, who were just kind of they're just kind of there. I mean, Courtney Lee, he started 6 of the games and played a pretty big role, but Redick and Gortat were nothing. I think Redick got in 1 game or whatever. So it's just kind of funny to know. I mean, of course, given their ages, they were still 24, they were babies, but just knowing that they had 2 of those guys, on the bench there, and they turned into, future, serviceable players. And it just didn't matter. I mean, that team was so good. I mean, Mike, not to give you more nightmares, but Dwight had 25.8 and 13. Rashard Lewis was 18.3 points per game, and he shot 48.4% from three. So that's pretty good from what I.
And Dwight
Hito Turkoglu 17.2, and he shot 39% from three. And then this is you're not gonna want Michael Pietrus, 13.8 points per game. And can you guess his 3-point percentage?
Oh, it was crazy. He was good.
It was 47.2. So sorry, but
seriously, I would challenge you. Like, who on the Magic was not good that series?
Look
at the numbers.
Tony Batum. Yeah, that's about it. I like that.
Like, they were all unreal. Like, watching that series, it was like it made no sense. It was like broken. Like, they had cheat codes. Like, it was stupid. Like that. Oh God, it drives me crazy.
I think one of my favorite stat line of that, Hito Turkoglu, he shot 39% from the field and 39.1% from three. So
get out of here! Like, and Hito was never like. The thing about Hito was like, Hito was a good player, but he was never known as like a shooter. Like, he wasn't like a 3-point specialist. Like, what was he doing? Like, what is? Oh God!
All right. I think we're
gonna have to cut Mike off. I'm gonna disconnect him, and then we'll carry this show on the rest of the way. But,
I'm short circuiting.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, Mike. We'll see you next time.
So
stay with us. You're about to get Shaq. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thanks.
So well,
we should probably let
before that. So after the season, would you Mike, were you thinking like, okay, do we just need to run it back? Do we need a new coach? Do we just need to make a trade? Or, do you recall kind of how you felt about, or if there was like kind of a vibe of, okay, what's wrong with the team? Or was it just anxiety?
Yeah, it's like run it back. I think a lot of it was run it back. I was never like anti Mike Brown. A lot of people were, because he was never terribly creative offensive coach. And I think a lot of maybe the players' failings in that series were blamed on Mike Brown and his poor or basic offensive schemes. But I was always fine with Mike Brown. He was a good defensive coach, and he did well for this team. So it was divided over that. I think Cavs fans got spoiled when Dan Gilbert would spend money and make big trades, and you have LeBron. Every single opportunity, Cavs fans are unrealistically expecting us to make a trade or a big free agent signing. So I think that was always sort of on Cavs fans' radar. But I think if you asked most Cavs fans, they were kind of okay with the core of the team, especially because a guy like Mo Williams, who was a flawed player and probably could have or should have been upgraded, he was an all-star the year before. So maybe, he just had a bad series. And he was another, like, a lot of those guys were such fan favorites. Like, fans love Delonte. I mean, I'm staring at a signed authentic Mo Williams jersey right now. Like, these guys meant a lot to Cleveland fans. Like, Z meant a ton to Cleveland fans. So it was kind of like, let's add another piece to get over the hump. Not necessarily we need to blow this up.
Yeah. So in the off season, in 2009, as Rich alluded to, the Cavs acquired a Shaq for Ben Wallace and Sasha Pavlovich. Finally, the Sasha era ends, sadly, and then the other key signings are Anthony Parker, Jamario Moon, and Leon Poe. I think Parker was kind of there to be like a, sort of a defensive wing stopper type player. And as far as the key players for the 2010 season, besides LeBron, were Mo, Parker, Verajao, Hickson, JJ Hickson, who's kind of taken a big role for the first time, Delonte, Ilgauskas, and then Shaq, who actually only had 1,240 minutes in 53 games. I forgot he had missed that much time during the season. And he was 38, 39, so he was, he wasn't going to be playing, the full season, but he played fewer minutes than I recalled. And then Gibson and Moon were kind of all the guys in the rotation who played more than 1,000 minutes during the season. And then the big deal at the deadline was trading for Anton Jameson, and they ended up trading away Ilgauskas, but he returned to the he was released and immediately returned to the team 30 days later. I believe that was the last time that rule was allowed. It was barred with the next either it was the next collective bargaining agreement or maybe it was by the league that summer. But either way, that I believe is the last instance of that occurring, of a player returning to his team after being traded. The Cavs were 61-21, so we're down a little bit in the record. A 6.17 SRS, which was second in the league behind the Magic, even though they had a better regular season record than the Magic did by 2 games. We're first in the East, and then they ended up falling in the second round to the Celtics, who were only a 50-win team and had a 3.37 SRS. So kind of a big upset there, even though the Celtics had been, they had won the championship in 2008, had been really good in 2009, but had taken a step back, at least in the regular season in 2010. So obviously another disappointment, perhaps. I'm not sure if you could even say it was a bigger surprise, but given the quality of the team, maybe it was a bigger surprise. And I recall game 1 went pretty well in this series for the Cavs, did it? Or am I misremembering that?
No, it was. That team was really weird. Shaq was crazy out of shape and wasn't particularly useful or productive when he was on the court. Probably, in retrospect, would have been better without him. Jameson was sort of the guy everyone was screaming to get and was really excited about, because at the time, even still now to some extent, but at the time, like, getting a stretch 4 was everything. And that was actually predicated a lot off of what happened the year before against the Magic. Like having, Rashard Lewis, we saw what Rashard Lewis did to us. Having a guy that has some size and can step out and shoot threes was key for the Magic. So we were trying to replicate that, and fans were really intense about getting that guy. And Jameson wasn't that good. He was never that good. And then the playoffs, I do recall they started out well. And I think if you look at the actual stats for that series, LeBron wasn't bad, but there were some very, very questionable, weird things in that series. And, there was a lot of weird stuff in that series.
That was the series.
Yeah.
That was the series.
I mean, it was game 5 in particular, as I recall. It was just like where LeBron just seemed to excessively defer and not be mentally into the game, and really got criticized seriously for his performance. And I think that was kind of one of the first signs that maybe, at least it was read as maybe a sign that he wasn't going to be sticking around. And for me, I always kind of thought it was similar to kind of what happened with him with the Mavs in 2011 in the finals, where he kind of gets to a point where he kind of gets in his own handle a little too much, and he reads all these options and is always trying to kind of figure out something that will work, and then once he can't figure it out, he kind of withdraws within himself. But I don't know, that is just sort of a kind of been my theory about it, but it's difficult to know exactly what happened there, but agreed that it was very weird and off-putting.
Yeah, and I draw a lot of parallels from how he carried himself and produced in that game to a lot of how he played early last season when he came back to the Cavs, where you had Kyrie Irving kind of doing his own thing. He was dealing with Dion Waiters and this coach that he didn't really know and trust. And I think LeBron, I really do think he can be kind of a prickly personality on the court, and he can kind of throw up his hands and say, you guys figure it out. And I think up until that moment in the Celtics series, it had been a happy-go-lucky LeBron, and we had never seen that before. LeBron was always giving 100% effort. LeBron always, he's a model teammate, great guy, classy, super mature, but that was the beginning of the cracks in the armor and where you started to see flaws in LeBron. And I think that's fine. I mean, ultimately, like, no player is perfect. Nobody is a perfect teammate and super mature all the time. So I think ultimately it's fine, but that was really the beginning of it. And then after that, we'll talk about it, but when he left, that's where you started hearing the stories about how him and his people and his crew sort of started running the Cavs organization and really started running roughshod over Gilbert and the management. So I think that was really the first time in LeBron's career we started to see this, I don't know, frustrated or like you guys figure this out because I can't do it all.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, Jason, not to cut you off, but I thought one of the things that was kind of interesting about the Anton Jameson, and I guess I'll pose this question to Mike, is I'm reading the Mark Stein report of when this trade went down, and of course we don't know if this exactly was what was going to happen or whatever, but here's a quote from Mark Stein. He says, the Cavs have been chasing Jameson since last season, and ultimately preferred this trade in part because they did not have to surrender blossoming young forward J.J. Hickson. The Suns were demanding Hickson along with Ilgauskas' expiring salary for Amari Stoudemire. Do you think, and of course this is this sort of Amari, what do you think? If Amari is on this team over Jameson, is there a different, do things change?
And do you think that was a real trade? Because I feel like
we don't know.
Yeah, this is a running joke in a circle of Cavs fans that I run with on Twitter. Every trade deadline when we're talking about possible trades, it's just a joke you bring up. Like, do you think we could trade J.J. Hickson for Amari Stoudemire? You know what? That would have been awesome. I would have loved that because at the time Amari was like a world destroyer. He was awesome. But no, I don't think that was a real thing at all. Because like J.J. Hickson was okay. I mean, like, he was fine. But like the J.J. Hickson you've seen in Portland and in Denver and subsequently throughout his career, like, that's the same J.J. Hickson from his like first year or two in the league. Like, he's never developed. Like, he's a decent little scorer. He's not efficient at all. He does really dumb stuff. He doesn't defend whatsoever. He steals rebounds from his teammates to pad his stats. I mean, like, it's the same guy. So no, I mean, absolutely not. Like, I don't think that was a real trade, and it would have been awesome if we could have got Amari because, then I think it changes everything. I think the Cavs could have legitimately won the title. LeBron would have stayed, all of that stuff. But no, that's no possible way.
There is Steve Kerr did say at the at one of the, I think it was Sloan conference in 2014, where he said that they were looking at J.J. Hickson in a possible Amari trade. They were kind of like looking at tape and looking at like analytics and stuff, and were we're at least like looking at the option. But they and then it also says that that basically Hickson, like, they looked at the tape and they said, well, basically all of that he can do is dunk. He's not doing anything from 2 to 5 feet. So they were kind of, it seemed to indicate that they probably weren't interested in it. But there was at least, like, I think you can say that maybe they were considering the possibility or looking at the possibility. But, it does seem unlikely that if that were genuinely offered, the Cavs would have, valued J.J. Hickson that much. So
yeah, and I remember hearing that. I think he was on like Simmons' podcast or something when he said that. And sure, I'm sure he looked at it and it was offered. I'm sure the Cavs would have loved for that trade. I'm sure they offered it a million different ways, trying to build a trade around Hickson. But I don't think that the Cavs had the assets, because it would take probably JJ and multiple firsts or valuable first round picks, and the Cavs just didn't have that. The cupboard was bare.
Yeah. So anything else from why don't you, Rich, how about LeBron's year that year?
Yeah, so LeBron's year, 29.7 points per game, 7.3 rebounds per game, 8.6 assists per game. So his assists went real high this year, and then a 10.9 valuable replacement player. So it wasn't as good valuable replacement player wise as it was the year prior, but you're still talking about a very minor difference. He's still an elite, unbelievably world beater player this year. Almost 30 points per game, over 7 rebounds per game, and over 8 assists per game, almost approaching 9 assists per game. So it's just fantastic this year.
Also worth noting that he won the MVP in 2009 and 2010 and was all NBA from 06 on. So the last 5 seasons in Cleveland, he was all NBA all 5 of those years. Was on the second team in 05. So it was the only year he was not on an all NBA team was his first year. So he was pretty good, but he obviously the Cavs, before he leaves, they fire Mike Brown and Danny Ferry. They hire Byron Scott in an attempt to possibly an attempt to appease LeBron. He decides to leave, goes to Miami. There's the infamous decision special that upsets a lot of people in Cleveland in particular, and sparks the letter from Dan Gilbert decrying LeBron's decision and his selfishness. As Mike alluded to, a lot of reporting. I think Woj had quite a few hit pieces in during LeBron's last season, even maybe before that. I felt like there was after that, even in the last couple of years, there was There was, a few Woj hit pieces here and there, and some other national media reporting that was kind of a little bit unfavorable about LeBron. Obviously, heading into free agency, it was a huge deal, and there was definitely talk of, talk. Some of it was unfavorable. I felt like the Cleveland media was generally positive toward him, and I always felt like there was, I live in Ohio, but I live in Central Ohio. I have connections to Northeast Ohio, and was reading a lot of the reporting about LeBron. So I'm certainly not as nearly plugged into the level that Mike might be, but I always kind of felt like there was a psychological fear in Cleveland that we don't want to criticize LeBron too harshly because he might leave. And I always kind of felt like that was, from the fans to, even the local media. I always kind of felt like there was that undercurrent of things going on. I don't know if Mike would agree with that or not, but I do kind of feel like that kind of maybe played into how he was treated in Cleveland, and then maybe even added to the backlash once he left, and the anger that kind of fed with him leaving and how he left.
I don't know if people were didn't criticize LeBron because they were afraid he was going to leave. I think the local media protected LeBron because of just the mechanics of sports journalism. They had a lot of ins with LeBron's camp, and those were very necessary because LeBron held a lot of power. And this still holds true. It held true in Miami, and it holds true today that the local media people never really stand up to LeBron. And mostly the national media people, the national beat guys, like the ESPN guys and stuff, they don't either. You never really see Windhorst getting strong with LeBron. He'll take he'll be critical a little bit here and there, but
yeah.
For the most part,
after the playoff, I feel like after the last playoff, he did in, I think, the 2010 playoffs and the 2011 playoffs and after the decision a bit. But other than that, I agree. And it was pretty safe to do so at that point. So
and another piece of interesting thing is, so Windhorst, the season before, was writing for the Plain Dealer alongside a veteran columnist for the Plain Dealer named Terry Pluto. Yeah. They wrote this book called Making of an MVP, and it was literally just it was literally a puff piece about LeBron and his upbringing.
It's terrible. Yeah. I remember getting that once and was like, yeah, it was awful.
It was embarrassing, and it was really bad. And this was the kind of stuff the local media was doing. And I think the fans blindly defended LeBron, but I think that's more of just how any fan base defends their star player. Lakers fans do it with Kobe. It's natural. When you have a generational talent, you protect that guy, and you protect him against anything. And you see national media, it's like us versus the national guys, because they'll never understand. Then when LeBron left, I think fans reacted the way they did because how were they supposed to act? I mean, that's never happened. There's never been an athlete like that was so established and so successful that, like, at the time it was plainly clear this is one of the all-time greats, that leaves like that. Just the way he did it, and it was kind of abrupt. It hurt. I mean, like, that hurts, and that's psychologically damaging. And then factor in all of the baggage that Cleveland fans carry around as fans of Cleveland sports teams. That's a tough pill to swallow. And, like, what do you expect? I mean, at the end of the day, what does it matter if fans burn jerseys or not? Like, I think Dan Gilbert probably made a mistake with the letter, but ultimately, it didn't matter. LeBron came back. So, I mean, it's hard to say that was a huge mistake because it never kept LeBron away, even though a lot of bloggers and national guys mocked it and said, you've burned not only have you burned bridges with LeBron James and people associated with LeBron James, but you've burnt bridges with free agents. And you know what? That hasn't bared out. So, I would kind of challenge that these were visceral, emotional reactions, and, it ended up working out fine.
Yeah. Do you think that it was because I always kind of thought, to me, there were a lot of Cavs fans that I worked with and knew who were saying that it didn't really have to do with LeBron leaving, but it had more to do with the way that he left. Do you think that is really the case, or do you think that reaction would have been that strong even if he had left in maybe more graceful way?
Yes. I think it's both. It's
okay.
That, I mean, nobody wants a top 5 player, top 3 player of all time. Nobody wants them to leave their team. Like, people are going to freak out over that always. But, like, it was incredibly embarrassing to get your ass kicked, like, going out the door. Like, LeBron didn't need to leave the way he did. And I think he acknowledges that. He in a roundabout way apologized and said he regretted the way he did it. So I think it was both. I mean, I think fans were really upset that he was leaving. I think they were upset he left after what happened in the Boston series, where it seemed like he almost gave up. Where I think in retrospect, when you look back, it might have been he was just frustrated with his teammates. Whereas at the time, people equated it as he already had made his decision and he was just quitting. So I think that, in combination with going on national TV without really anybody having any idea and, kicking us, right in the gut, I think a combination of all of that caused it.
Any thoughts, Rich?
Yeah, I've always thought that as well, that it was sort of... I from Mike's perspective, like he said, I get why the Cavaliers fans, there was such a visceral reaction to it. And you also have to keep in mind as well that it was also we're talking about media members and that sort of stuff. It was very nice to find, like, the group of 10 kids that were burning a jersey and go, like, look what's going on in Cleveland. Like, right. I don't I don't know that everybody was like, all right, let's all gather our jerseys and do, like, a public burning. Like, they just sort of,
I've still got mine, so
yeah. So you're good. So, but they showed, like, the same clip of, like, the same 10 kids, like, being like, yeah, take that, LeBron. Like, so. And I'm sure there was a lot of, anger directed towards him. And I think from my perspective, too, as sort of an outside fan, and I think in general, a lot of fans as well, it was the way that he did it. Everybody just saw it as being kind of weird, kind of icky. I mean, the decision thing, even though, he would go out and say, hey, look, I donated all the money to charity and all that. So it just felt very like, this is a guy, and I'm a huge LeBron fan. I've always been a huge LeBron fan, but that was the first time where I felt distant from him, as in, like, he just felt like he just didn't get it, or I don't know what it was. There was something about what was going through, and I don't mind what he did. Going to Miami, fine with that. It was I think, obviously a great decision for him and his career and everything that went on, but just everything leading up to it. And I think it was because of what we saw in that Boston series, and that it did, as Mike said, it looked like he literally gave up, and then the soonest he could, he bounced out of town, had this TV show to say he was leaving town. Like, there was just so many things that kind of happened at the same time, and just from a PR standpoint and an optics standpoint is what really hurt it a lot, whereas the decisions to do it and all that sort of stuff was fine and well-founded, and I think there was different ways to do it where it wouldn't have been such a big deal, but it was such a weird, the optics were just so weird for those first few few months, and it was like, who is this guy? Like, this is a guy everybody sort of thought they kind of had a read on, and then like everything that he did for like a few months was just like, I don't know who this guy is. Like, what a weird person. Like, we just didn't anticipate this was how it was going to end with LeBron in Cleveland, even if it had to end or even if he had to move on.
Yeah, and I think there's I do think there's another side of it of like, fans have a sometimes ugly feeling of entitlement when it comes to players and their teams. But I don't think that's a Cleveland thing. I mean, I think that's just I think that's a, fan of any team that, where, particularly the sports fans are, particularly passionate, or where, sports are really a huge deal in the city. And I think there are a combination of things that, Mike, you allude to, that make Cleveland kind of a special place for some of those passions. But I do think that, so I do think there is some, like, the other side of it, there is some, like, kind of ugliness of fans feeling like there's like an ownership of a player, feeling that they should always be loyal to the color of that jersey rather than kind of caring about other things that are really more important in their lives. But losing a player of that stature, the understanding of feelings of being upset by that and being disappointed in that, of course, that totally does entirely makes sense. It's just a matter. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. No. I want to agree with you, but also disagree. I totally agree with. There was a little bit of that, like, you call it ownership of the player, but like expect them to be loyal at all costs. I agree. There's a little bit of that, and it's kind of gross. But on the other hand, LeBron James, when he was here, always played up that I'm the Akron kid. He said he's going to bring a title to Northeast Ohio. Like, he would say a lot of stuff about loyalty and his devotion to being here, and then to leave like that, it was kind of like, why? So I get what you're saying, but also he didn't help himself through some of the stuff he said.
That's true. Yeah. So obviously LeBron, he spent 4 years in Miami and came back to Cleveland. They made the finals last year and are doing very well this year. Although there's obviously anxiety about whether they're going to be able to win a championship before LeBron begins the decline phase of his career. So what are kind of your feelings about LeBron now and about how his Cavs stint has gone so far, Mike?
I mean, it's hard to argue. I mean, they were in the finals immediately once he's back, and that's after pretty much losing, like having a completely lost first half of the season last year. So I think it's fine. I think this team, what I will say from the fan perspective is it's been different. Like, the joy is gone to some extent. And I can't speak for all fans, but I know as, I'm in my mid 30s. So I was like in a perfect age for, LeBron's first run with the Cavs. Like, I was, I didn't have a ton of responsibility in my life. I was able to watch every game. Like, I was super into it, and it was just really exciting. And now it feels very business-like. It feels very mechanical. There's all kinds of, does Kevin Love fit? Is Kyrie Irving good? All the goofy trade stuff. Like, it's just exhausting now, where, like, my memories of LeBron's first run with the Cavs were so fun and electric, and, like, even going to games and the fans, like, it felt different the first time around. So I think on the court success, like, there's ups and downs during the regular season, but, that we made the finals the first year, LeBron was back, and then this year, I don't see any reason why they can't advance at least to the conference finals, if not to the finals. Like, there's no real excuse for them not to. So, like, on the court, that's awesome, but it doesn't feel the same. It's not as organic. It feels more business-like. And something changed. It's just not the same.
Yeah. It's like 1990s punk versus 1970s punk.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty fair.
So do you think, like, as far as like the culture of the team, I talked about before, do you feel like they have, because kind of feel like during that first run there was a lot of like, you talked about some of the pieces about like LeBron running things and running roughshod, and of Gilbert being impulsive, and and some turmoil. Do you think that some of those things are better now, or are they not? Because I can kind of see both sides, because you feel like there's a lot of rumors. Obviously, David Blatt got fired, and he was a weird personality, and that may have just been kind of a him thing rather than a symptom of a larger problem in the organization. But I'm just kind of curious if you get a sense of that at all.
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. You said, do I think things have gotten better? I don't think the answer is about better or worse. I think LeBron has as much, if not more, power over the Cleveland organization than maybe he had in his first run in Cleveland, and he definitely has more power than he had in Miami. I don't think it was totally, I don't think it was LeBron calling for David Blatt's head. But, if he wanted to step in and save David Blatt, he could have. And I don't think LeBron needed to say anything to get David Blatt fired. I think everyone kind of knew. But to your point, I totally agree. I thought David Blatt was kind of a trash coach, and his personality sure didn't help him. So that was a mess. But I think LeBron holds a lot of power. And I don't think that's necessarily good or bad. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, he came back and Dan Gilbert brought him back to win titles. And, if you can get to the finals or if you can win a title, mission accomplished. Like, he can have all the power he wants if he does it on the court.
Rich, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of similar to Mike as well, is that one of the things that sort of changed, at least from my standpoint of LeBron, is it seems like it's a little bit more business. There's not as much fun, which part of the big reason why I loved LeBron when he first came in the league and obviously in those peak Cleveland years is because it seemed like he was having a lot of fun. And even in the Miami years to an extent, like after that first title, then that next year was like, okay, you got kind of opened up again. Now he's back in Cleveland, so the pressure's kind of on. So you get kind of a weirdness of, it just seems like everything with this team is all there's not fun. I don't know. It's hard to describe. Yeah, it's just like even watching them, like I don't enjoy watching them play basketball either. There's just something weird about it. I don't know what it is exactly. And I think that one of the problems too, and I hate this about sports culture in general, is that it's championship or bust. And I get why, in Cleveland it is, and I get that him coming back and sort of saying all these things about getting titles for Cleveland, that sort of stuff. For me, I've always tried to enjoy, sports beyond, who wins the championship or how do you win a championship or a championship or bust or whatever. But you see sort of the circumstances that are surrounding LeBron and Cleveland and that franchise and that city and everything goes into it, that you see why there's just this immense, crazy pressure. And it's just, to me, I haven't enjoyed LeBron in this run because it just doesn't feel like a fun-loving sort of fun player. Still great, still awesome to see when he's at his full power, but it's just not the. I don't know. It's just not the one. It's not the LeBron I sort of grew up with or watched have a ton of fun in Cleveland, even if he's just as good of a player as he was, even then.
And I think it's also, I don't know if it's necessarily even LeBron. I don't think it's necessarily even fair for him. I mean, like, this Cavs team is just like kind of boring. I mean, like, yeah. Kyrie's kind of like a little brand robot, and Kevin Love is like this milquetoast. Like, he just kind of exists. Like, there's just not like personalities on this team. Like, man, those LeBron teams in his first run, like, they were bursting with personalities and they had fun and they goofed around. And I think LeBron is definitely more business. He's old now too. I mean, that's part of it, but I think he's all business, but I also think that, like, I don't know if he feels comfortable around his teammates and his teammates feel comfortable around him. It just seems like a lot of, like, it's not a team. It's just a bunch of coworkers who show up for work.
Yeah. And I think the weight of expectations is just like it makes it, like, it's, when you get to the point where you can only enjoy games if you're winning and if you're, getting closer to a championship, and anything less than that is, not successful, that does take a lot of the joy out of basketball. I mean, LeBron didn't have that early in his career. Certainly they wanted to win a title and they wanted to be successful, but like, it wasn't like it was championship or bust every year. And now, it's gotten to that point. but yeah, and I, and there's also, I mean, we're in a different media environment now where, social media wasn't a thing until kind of late into LeBron's run with Cleveland. And we're kind of inundated with that stuff. And I'm sure, we're all older now and have a different perspective and a different attitude toward basketball than we did in the, mid 2000s. So maybe there's just something about having a different perspective now and being older too, that we just kind of see it differently than our memories of that first team. Although I do agree that there is definitely a different vibe, and there is not really, like, I guess also part of it is, like, on paper, this Cavs team, like, you would think, like, LeBron, Kyrie, and Love, who are all interesting players, would make Magic, like, aesthetically pleasing basketball Magic together. And for whatever reason, that really has not happened. That's only happened a very small amount of the time.
Well, I don't think they have any chemistry together. They don't really know each other outside of, like, being shoved together in this random thing. That's why, like, I feel really weird saying it, but I almost rooted for the Kyrie for CP3 trade, or, like, getting Melo. Like, at least you're putting some of, like, LeBron's dudes with him. And, like, then now there's a personality, and there's, like, these guys get along, and they're singularly focused on this thing. Like, I just want some cohesiveness here. That's what I feel like's missing. It's like LeBron and, like, this random group of guys. Like, Kyrie was kind of here, and then, like, we traded for Kevin Love randomly, and LeBron signed here. And then you have a couple of, like, LeBron's guys. Like, we had Mike Miller, and then you have Jones. So, like, it's just a really, really random hodgepodge of guys. Yeah. And I would just rather there be some, like, there's no personality to this team. And if at least they did something of, like, I'm not saying it would have been great basketball wise, but you get Melo or CP3, like, now there's a personality, there's a cohesiveness. LeBron feels a connection with somebody where I don't think he does now.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of churn too. I mean, it may just be a thing where they just need more time to create that a little bit, to develop that relationship and more. I mean, that's certainly a possibility as well. But I hadn't really thought about the relationships, with the advantage of having CP3 or Melo, and the advantage of that relationship to LeBron. I thought about it more in basketball terms, but in personality terms, I can definitely see where that might have some merit.
Yeah, no, basketball wise, I don't think those trades are fantastic. Maybe CP3, maybe. Yeah, right. I think ultimately, like, I think about him from the personality standpoint of, because I think LeBron is such, like, a creature of, like, he wants people who he feels close to. There's a reason, like, Damon Jones still follows him around as part of his crew. It's the reason that his whole, like, group of friends and business associates are all, like, friends and childhood friends. Like, LeBron thrives on that trust and that closeness, and I think it trickles down to his teammates. He wants to feel comfortable, and that's why it worked in Miami, because he had Dwayne Wade there. He doesn't really have, outside of, Jones here in Cleveland, like, he doesn't have that guy.
Yeah, I guess they lost Verja, who might have been another one of those guys who just, of course, left the team. So
sure was, yeah.
So, Rich, anything else before we get out of here?
No, I think that's it for me.
Okay. Mike, anything that you want to let our listeners know that you are up to?
Follow me on Twitter, Mikey5Bucks. IGoHardNow is very dormant right now. I don't know if it'll ever get started again or not. A couple of the writers have been kicking around doing something, so keep your eye on my Twitter account on that. And the only other thing is, if you're into music, myself and another writer from IGoHardNow write for a music blog, and that's beardedgentlemanmusic.com, and you should check it out. If you're into music, it's a really good site. Really interesting people, and if you want to check out my writing about music, head over there.
Cool. And thanks, everyone, for checking us out. You can, of course, find us at hardwoodparoxysm.com, and we're on Twitter and Facebook, both at Over and Back NBA. And would appreciate it if you gave us a rating and review on iTunes. And also, we are now on Stitcher. You can find both our podcast, or you can find the whole HP network of podcasts if you want to listen to all the great shows that are part of the network. Either way, the rating and review and subscribe is wonderful. So until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon.